The Republican Party has stolen the Supreme Court.
If you follow politics and political media, you have certainly experienced your fair share of hyperbole. That is, exaggeration to make things seem more serious or extreme than they actually are. Heated rhetoric, grandiose projections. These are things that both sides, the right and the left, can be guilty of from time to time. I do my best to avoid being hyperbolic and base my arguments and projections of future developments in facts, data, and social science. I'm not going to tell you that a Democrat winning an election is the end of the world as we know it, and it's time to hide out in the bomb shelter. Likewise, a Republican winning an election is not a gift from God, an indicator that humanity and the West have been saved through divine intervention. But in looking at the videos we do on this channel, many from our friends over at Now This, we run across a great deal of exaggeration and hyperbole. A perfect example would be today's video, where a large man wearing a shirt 3 sizes too big tells us that Republicans have, in his words, stolen the Supreme Court. A crime has been committed. Somebody call Columbo. No one has stolen the Supreme Court, as we'll discuss in today's video. But ironically, his planned solution to this supposed problem would actually come pretty close to constituting stealing the judiciary. At the very least, it would be a clear and desperate power grab from a spoiled party deeply triggered by not getting everything they want, immediately and right away. So, are you ready to find out how evil Republican masterminds conspired to steal the Supreme Court right before our very eyes, and how this guy and his dual-purpose dress shirt / kite-surfing kite plan on restoring the sanctity to our democracy? If you're a fan of seeing just how desperate the left is becoming, this looks like it should be a good one. But first, your online privacy and security. With Christmas approaching, you're probably looking forward to relaxing with family and friends. Unfortunately, hackers don't take time off. Just a few weeks ago, it was discovered that a security vulnerability on Tumblr made it possible for hackers to make off with users' login credentials and other private user information. Whenever you use a device, your cell phone, tablet, or laptop, on a public Wi-Fi network, you're putting yourself at risk of having your personal information, including financial data, logged and stolen. You need to protect yourself online, and that's why I use Virtual Shield, the easiest VPN in the world to use. It's one of the fastest VPNs out there, and their strict no-log policy protects all of its users from data breaches. With Virtual Shield, you have the right to remain private. This Black Friday month, Virtual Shield is offering 40% off all VPN plans and all premium add-ons. Plus, don't forget about IdentiSafe, which gives you the ability to block off computer microphone and camera access from any unwanted spies and hackers. There's no reason not to keep you and your family safe online, protecting yourself from entities public and private. Stop hackers and spies in their tracks with Virtual Shield, and keep all of your browsing data private, the way it should be. VirtualShield.com/allsup today for 40% off. They're the only VPN company that I trust.
The Republican Party has stolen the Supreme Court, and it's time for Democrats to take it back by adding 4 more seats. Through legislative shenanigans and dirty tricks, they denied Barack Obama his constitutional role in appointing a new judge to the Supreme Court.
Remember when you were a kid at recess and you played pickup basketball or football against the other kids on the playground, but you were just a little bit younger or maybe not as fast or athletic as the other kids? What if when you lost, instead of going out there the next day to try again, you just had the ability to change the rules to make sure that you always win? Touchdowns only count if they're scored by 12-year-olds with brown hair, brown eyes, and 3 moles on their left arm. Looks like I win again. If you tried this on the playground, you would rightfully be called a spoiled brat and a cheater. And I fail to see how this guy's solution is any different. Barack Obama wasn't denied his constitutional right to appoint a Supreme Court justice, or whatever this guy's trying to claim. Obama made his appointment, Merrick Garland. But the Senate's duty is to advise and consent on Supreme Court appointments. And there is no constitutional requirement, none, that court appointees must be considered for debate or hearings by the Senate. I would challenge any leftist to find me the provision in the Constitution that Mitch McConnell and Chuck Grassley violated when they refused to hold hearings on Merrick Garland's nomination. Garland was appointed by Barack Obama near the end of his term, and the Republican Senate chose to wait until the presidential election was over before considering a nominee. That way, the American voters would get to decide on who they wanted to nominate the next Supreme Court justice. And they chose, as you may recall, President Trump, not Hillary Clinton. There were no dirty tricks or shenanigans here. It's basic politics and senatorial procedure. Democrats would have done the exact same thing if there had been a Democratic Senate and a Republican president, and I don't blame them. These are elected officials using their rightful authority to stand up for the interests of their constituents.
And instead rammed through radical right-wing judge Neil Gorsuch. Then, Trump nominated Brett Kavanaugh, a man accused of sexual assault, to the Supreme Court. Despite overwhelming public opposition, the Republican Senate pushed him through.
You'll notice that this is a favorite tactic of the lying leftist media. They'll use labels like radical, far-right, white nationalist, racist, etc. without ever defining them or giving proof for their accusations. It allows them to destroy people's names and reputations, totally unfairly and dishonestly. There's no evidence that Brett Kavanaugh committed sexual assault, nor that he's deeply unpopular, or that Neil Gorsuch is a radical, scary, evil, bad guy man. Want to give some evidence, pal? Or are we just supposed to take your dishonest word for it?
When Americans think about the Supreme Court, they have a narrow vision of what the court does. Maybe you've heard of Roe versus Wade, but have you heard of parents involved? In that decision, Chief Justice John Roberts and a 5-justice majority of Republicans struck down plans that local communities had prepared to desegregate schools.
So many lies from this guy already. I think this is going to be a trend. Picks versus Seattle Schools was a case where the Supreme Court ruled that the Seattle School District could not take race into account when deciding whether or not students got into the high school they applied for. Seattle Schools allow students to attend any high school they want, and before this suit, the district used a student's race as a tiebreaker when determining their applications. They would intentionally attempt to make all schools have a 60-40 white to non-white ratio, regardless of neighborhood demographics or students' choice. This wasn't about school desegregation, despite what this very dishonest presenter is trying to tell you. I'll include a link to the case brief below so you can read about it for yourself.
When you see stories of mass shootings, remember that in Heller, the Supreme Court struck down common sense gun regulations, again on a party line vote.
No, they found that it was unconstitutional for the District of Columbia to ban handguns and that U.S. citizens can own firearms for self-protection. Again, case brief is below. You can read it for yourself. It's astounding to me that there are a whole host of people out there who will see videos like this and think, wow, yes, this is like totally not good and we need to fix this. And the thought of verifying basic facts never crosses their mind.
And when you read the latest dire projections about climate change, think of Michigan versus EPA, where a 5-4 partisan court struck down EPA regulations of power plants.
Yes, you mean those dire climate prognostications of the world ending from climate change, which never seem to come to fruition? Yeah, forgive my lack of immediate concern. What do you think? Is our pal here telling the truth about Michigan versus EPA? Did the court really abolish regulations on power plant pollution? Not quite. The court found that the EPA had unreasonably imposed specific regulations on coal-fired power plants that they had previously found to be unnecessary. They found that the EPA had incorrectly interpreted the appropriate and necessary requirement of the Clean Air Act by not considering the cost-to-benefit ratio of these specific regulations. Again, the case briefing is linked below if you want to read up and decide who's telling the truth and who is hyperbolizing and lying and hoping you're too lazy or disinterested to look at the facts.
When you see the rampant right-wing voter suppression in these midterms, remember that a court decision, Shelby County versus Holder, paved the way for it. And when you read about billionaires giving millions to super PACs, remember that another Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, made it possible. Just in the past year, the court weakened public sector unions in Janus, and in Epic Systems, made it easier for companies to get away with sexual harassment.
If we debunked every case he's talking about here, it would take 20 or 25 minutes, and we just don't have the time. But given his track record of lying thus far, you're right to be skeptical. I would encourage you all to go to oyez.com, that's OYEZ.com, and look up the case briefs for all of these cases he's talking about. Decide who's telling the truth. Basically, the point he's making through all of these examples is that he and the rest of the left, presumably, doesn't like the decisions the Supreme Court has been making for the last 10 years or so, when DC versus Heller was decided in 2008. Interestingly enough, he seems to be okay with Obergefell v. Hodges, decided in 2015 in the midst of this supposedly evil, horrible, bigoted right-wing court, which legalized gay marriage nationwide. I want to know more about a solution, packing the courts, and how he plans on justifying that. Let's keep watching.
In Perez, the court enabled racist gerrymanders that disenfranchised voters of color. All of these decisions were 5-4 decisions, in which unelected Republican judges overturned the will of democratically elected lawmakers.
Oh, you mean like that cool thing that happens where unelected judges issue injunctions to interfere with our democratically elected president? Funny how you seem to be totally okay with that infringement of our democracy, but Supreme Court decisions where you lose are fundamentally and principally unfair.
These decisions were all seen as radical by constitutional scholars and even former Republican judges. Increasingly, these judges are not acting like lawyers, but rather like politicians. They use extreme legal theories to strike down laws that members of the Republican donor class, which bankroll their careers through the Federalist Society, don't like. Judges are supposed to interpret the law as honest brokers, but the conservative justices on the court have been acting like politicians for the past generation, as they have invoked highly dubious and regressive constitutional interpretations to kowtow to corporations and the elite at the expense of everyone else.
This guy forgot to read the book, never did the homework, just showed up to class and is now complaining that the final exam is unfair. The Supreme Court is a political body, and anyone who has taken a university-level class knows this. You can complain about not liking that, I suppose, but the truth is that the Supreme Court has always been a political body. Ever since Marbury versus Madison, when the court gave itself the authority to determine the constitutionality of legislation, the court has been inherently politicized. Competing views of the Constitution will lead to competing parties, appointing justices that benefit their party's view of the Constitution. In 2012, Ezra Klein, a noted liberal, wrote the following in the Washington Post, quote, "The people who serve as judges on the Supreme Court have been vetted by political parties, have often worked for political parties, frequently have loyalties to people in political parties who helped their career, and spend much of their time in Washington, where they sort into social groups they find congenial. They are, in other words, more, not less political than most Americans. So it would be very surprising if they were less, rather than more, polarized on an issue as politically polarizing as the healthcare law." End quote. We all know that the court is political by definition and always has been. Complaining about the court's political nature is a last resort for whatever side is losing as a result of recent court decisions. Do you want open partisans on the court that promise explicitly and publicly to always rule in favor of whatever the Republicans or Democrats want? Well, no, of course not. But is it unreasonable to expect that individuals with judicial perspectives, either left or right wing, will cast votes according to those perspectives? Of course not.
But we can end it. Throughout history, the number of justices on the court hasn't been fixed at 9. It has increased and decreased over time. Democrats can do the same next time they have power. That's why myself, LGBTQ advocate Aaron Belkin, and Harvard Law School professor Mark Tushnet are making the case for expanding the court. Our polling suggests that Democratic voters are ready for this change. The problem is that Democratic politicians aren't ready to lead. So we will.
All right, let's break that down. The number of justices has changed over time, true, but the largest amount of justices the court has ever had is 10, 1963 to 1966, for 3 years, before Congress shrank it back down to 7 justices. These three gentlemen's plan is to expand the court to 13 justices. That would result in the largest Supreme Court in American history. This has been tried in the past, as you may know. FDR attempted to expand the court to 15 justices during his term, but that plan was thoroughly rejected by Congress because they knew it would be an open and direct attempt to artificially change the balance of the nation's highest court. For all of the left's complaints about Trump being a fascist and having no respect for rule of law, nothing President Trump has done has been this authoritarian. Using the presidency and the Senate to commit essentially a hostile takeover of another branch of government would be a severe constitutional issue and completely undermine the balance of powers between the three branches. Their problem isn't that the Democrats aren't ready to lead. It's that they know a plan like this would be rightly perceived by Americans as an attempt by a political party to permanently capture an entire branch of government. This would be similar to the presidency and judiciary agreeing that the Senate should be expanded to 200 members, and the president gets to appoint all 100 new senators, and he's going to appoint all members of his own party.
We're producing a digital ad campaign called Project 12021, the date the next chance Democrats can take the House, Senate, and presidency.
Let me stop you right there, pal. Extremely unlikely. Also, that is like the worst name for a project ever.
On that day, we want Democrats to expand the court by 4 seats. This could be done by a simple act of Congress. The composition of the court has varied throughout its history and has changed 7 times in the past. During the Civil War, Lincoln expanded the court to ensure a pro-union, anti-slave majority. We'll be making our case to the Democratic base and the politicians that represent them. When we restore the courts, we can end gerrymandering and voter suppression once and for all.
Notice how this guy compares his crusade to pack the courts full of Democrats to the attempt to end slavery. Think he's got a little bit of a savior complex going on? I don't know. And the comparison between slavery and supposed voter suppression, that horrible, evil practice of not letting dead people and illegal aliens vote, it's all too much.
We can end the flow of big money into our political system. We can expand reproductive rights and roll back mass incarceration. We can live in a world where the laws made by elected politicians to protect women, people of color, LGBTQ people, immigrants, and workers are not overruled by 5 unelected politicians on the Supreme Court.
It sounds like this guy is in favor of ending judicial review, the process by which the court gets the ability to rule on the constitutionality of legislation. If so, that's an interesting proposition, one that many originalists and textualists would agree with him on. It's clear what's going on here. He's mad that President Trump is going to get a third Supreme Court pick and ensure a conservative majority on the court for years to come. It's no coincidence this was posted just a few days after notorious RBG took a notorious TUMBLE. His vision of Democrat court packing is, for now, a pipe dream, but there's something the right can learn from it. The art of the deal. Ask for more than you can actually receive, and have the other party meet you somewhere in the middle. While we can call out his blatant lies about case law, and naked attempt at a partisan power grab, and his parasailing shirt, his ambition, although misplaced, is actually admirable. The left tends to dream bigger and demand more than the right. That's part of why they've been winning culturally and politically for decades, dreaming big and aspiring towards massive goals. These are two behaviors of successful people, corporations, and political movements that the right would be wise to start emulating.